Have you ever been pushed to the brink, feeling like there's no way out, only to find out you've been underestimating your own power the whole time? Well, that's exactly what happened to Jay Carter. A 17-year-old high school student, with a sharp mind, a bright future, and the looks to turn heads. But, like so many others, he found himself facing a world that saw him as different. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon at Kingswood Academy's pool. Sun beating down, kids laughing, everyone enjoying a rare break from the stress of high school. But for Jay, things were about to take a dark turn. A group of popular kids, led by Brad Collins, a kid with more money than sense and a whole lot of arrogance, thought it would be funny to mess with him. They thought he was just some quiet kid, a target too easy to pick on. They pushed him into the deep end, not just with their hands, but with their cruel words and hateful actions. They thought it was just another prank, another way to assert their power. What they didn't know was that Jay wasn't the kind of kid to stay down. What they didn't realize was that beneath his calm exterior, beneath the quiet, collected demeanor, Jay had something they never saw coming. A secret talent that had been honed through years of discipline, sweat, and pain. As Jay struggled to catch his breath, pinned under the water, his mind flashed to his grandfather's words that had echoed in his mind since childhood. Control the fear, and the fear will control you. But this wasn't just about controlling fear. It was about survival. And what happened next would not only shock those who dared to mess with him, but it would also turn the tables on everything they thought they knew about power. Hold on tight, because what you're about to witness is more than a fight. It's a battle for dignity, for respect, and for the truth. A battle that starts at the bottom of a pool, but ends with a fight that could change everything. So, where are you watching from? Comment below and make sure to subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss tomorrow's story. It's one for the ages. Let me introduce you to Jay Carter. He's 17, tall, with a lean, athletic build. His skin is a deep, rich brown, and he's got these dark, piercing eyes that seem to see right through you. There's something about him that stands out, even when he's not trying. People often say he's got the kind of face that you just can't forget. One of those faces you see in a crowd and instantly know there's more to the story. But for Jay, that story isn't always one he's eager to share. Growing up wasn't easy, especially not for someone like him. As a kid, he didn't have the luxury of fitting in easily. His family wasn't rich, and he wasn't raised with a silver spoon in his mouth. He lived in a modest neighborhood, just a few miles outside Atlanta, where opportunities seemed to be few and far between. But that never stopped Jay from dreaming big. He's got a quiet confidence about him, the kind of guy who doesn't have to shout to get attention. You can tell he's not looking for a fight, but he's always ready to stand up for what's right. His mom, Denise, raised him to be strong, to hold his head up high no matter what. And his grandfather, well, he was the one who taught Jay the real meaning of strength. It wasn't the kind of strength you see in movies, all muscle and aggression. No, Jay's strength came from within, from the hours and hours he spent in his grandfather's backyard dojo, learning martial arts. His grandfather, a former Marine, was strict, but he wasn't about fighting for the sake of fighting. He taught Jay that real strength was about control. Control over your body, your mind, and your emotions. That's what made Jay different. While the other kids were out partying or hanging with their friends, Jay was in the gym, perfecting his moves. He wasn't showing off. He was building a foundation, a skill set that could protect him, that could give him confidence. Because growing up, he knew that being underestimated was both a curse and a gift. People always looked past him, thinking he was just another quiet kid, too shy to defend himself. But what they didn't know was that he had been training for years. Jay wasn't the type to pick fights, but he also wasn't the type to let people walk all over him. And that's something the kids at Kingswood Academy, especially Brad and his crew, were about to find out the hard way. So, while Jay might look like a normal teenager on the outside, there's so much more going on beneath the surface. He's a mix of calm, discipline, and raw, untapped power. And trust me, you'll want to pay attention, because Jay's about to show everyone exactly what it means to never underestimate him again. Now, let me set the scene for you. Kingswood Academy is one of those prestigious schools located just outside Atlanta. The kind of place where kids show up in designer clothes and drive cars their parents probably paid for with their trust funds. It's a school known for its high-end facilities, expensive tuition, and a reputation for being home to the elite. The classrooms are pristine, the sports fields immaculate, and the campus looks more like a country club than a school. But there's something a little off about Kingswood. Sure, it's beautiful on the outside, but inside? That's a whole different story. See, Kingswood isn't exactly a melting pot of cultures. In fact, it's a pretty homogeneous crowd. Mostly white kids from well-to-do families who've been living in that bubble their whole lives. Jay, being one of the few black students, has always felt like an outsider here. At first, he tried to fit in. Who wouldn't? You know how high school is, the desire to belong, to be part of the group, to feel accepted. But no matter how hard he tried, it always felt like there was something that set him apart. He didn't have the same expensive shoes, the fancy cars, or the connections that the other kids did. And it didn't help that his presence seemed to make some of the other students uncomfortable. Jay had always been able to sense when people were uncomfortable around him. It wasn't just about the glances, the whispers, or the way people stepped aside when he walked down the hallway. It was more subtle. It was in the way some of the teachers treated him like they didn't know what to do with him, or how other students made it clear, through small remarks or side glances, that he didn't quite fit in with their idea of the right crowd. The truth is, even though the school liked to brag about diversity, the reality was far from it. There were pockets of racial tension that no one ever seemed to talk about, swept under the rug like the uncomfortable elephant in the room. Jay had seen it all before. It wasn't anything new. The same tired stereotypes, the same old prejudices, just repackaged in a more polished, socially acceptable way. Then there was Brad Collins and his crew. Brad was one of the school's stars, the quarterback of the football team, the guy who never seemed to have a problem fitting in. His family had money, influence, and power. Brad could get away with anything, and for some reason, that made him feel entitled to treat people however he wanted, especially Jay. Brad's insults weren't always overt, but they were enough to make Jay feel like an outsider, even on a campus where everyone was supposed to be equal. In one smooth motion, Jay ducked under Kyle's wild swing and grabbed his arm. He used Kyle's momentum to spin him around, flipping the lanky kid over his shoulder with ease. Kyle hit the water with a loud splash, his body thrashing as he scrambled to stay afloat. Mason, the biggest of the three, was already making his move. He was more careful, sizing up Jay before charging with both fists raised, ready to crush him. Mason's size was intimidating, but Jay knew better than to be intimidated by brute force. He'd faced bigger challenges in his training, and this was just another obstacle to overcome. Jay didn't wait for Mason to get too close. He ducked under the swing of Mason's first punch, then used his foot to sweep Mason's legs out from under him. Mason stumbled, and Jay seized the opportunity, twisting his body to land a perfect knee strike to Mason's midsection. The air was knocked out of him, and he went down hard, gasping for breath as he sank beneath the surface of the water. For a moment, Jay thought it was over. He thought they might back off, regroup, maybe rethink their strategy. But then he heard Brad's voice again, this time tinged with real fear. "You think you're tough, huh?" Brad shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "You're nothing but a freak, Carter." The words hit Jay like a slap in the face, but he wasn't about to let them get to him. His grandfather's lessons echoed in his mind. True strength comes from control. Control yourself, and you control the situation. Jay turned to face Brad, who was now circling him like a predator, looking for an opening. Jay didn't flinch. He didn't even move. He just stood there, water rippling around his legs, his posture relaxed but ready. He knew what was coming. Brad lunged, trying to grab Jay's arms and force him into a chokehold. But Jay was ready. As Brad's hands reached for him, Jay stepped aside and twisted his body in one fluid motion. Brad's momentum carried him forward, and before he could react, Jay's leg shot out, landing a perfect sidekick to the back of Brad's knees. Brad went down with a loud splash, his face twisted in pain and shock. He flailed in the water, trying to find his footing, but Jay was already moving again. With a quick, powerful strike, Jay grabbed Brad's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him down into the shallow end of the pool. Brad gasped, his chest heaving as he tried to break free, but Jay's grip was unyielding. "You should have left me alone," Jay said quietly, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. Brad whimpered, trying to squirm out of Jay's hold. "You're crazy. You're gonna regret this, Carter," he shouted, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. Jay didn't respond. He wasn't interested in Brad's threats. He wasn't interested in proving anything. This wasn't about revenge. it was about standing his ground, showing that he wasn't the easy target they thought he was. By now, Kyle and Mason were struggling to recover. Kyle had managed to get back on his feet, but he was still coughing up water, his face pale and eyes wide with panic. Mason, gasping for air, finally surfaced, but he was clearly winded, his earlier bravado gone. They were no longer the intimidating bullies who thought they could take advantage of a weaker opponent. They were scared, and they didn't know how to handle someone like Jay. Jay didn't give them a chance to regroup. He stepped back, allowing the two of them to regain their bearings, but he wasn't about to let them off easy. He wasn't here to hurt them, but he was here to make a point. "You guys made your move," Jay said, his tone unwavering. "But you're not the ones in control anymore." The three of them just stared at him, completely stunned. Their confidence had crumbled, their arrogance evaporating with every moment that passed. They had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. Jay turned away, ready to leave the pool. He wasn't interested in fighting anymore. But before he could make it to the edge, he heard Mason's voice, shaky and desperate. "You're crazy, man. You're gonna pay for this." Mason spat, his words laced with anger and fear. Jay stopped, turning to face them one last time. His body was still poised, his movements calm, but there was a fire in his eyes, an unspoken promise. "No," Jay said firmly. "You're the ones who pushed me, and now you're gonna have to deal with the consequences." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Brad, Kyle, and Mason to struggle in the water behind him. The fight was over, but for Jay, it was just the beginning. As Jay made his way out of the pool, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The water had been his battleground, and now he was walking away from it, the tension of the fight slowly dissipating. He had done what needed to be done, stood his ground, and let those who tried to break him know that he wasn't someone they could walk over. But as Jay neared the poolside, he heard something that sent a chill down his spine. "We're not done, Carter." It was Brad's voice, shaking with fury but still carrying that arrogant tone that Jay had come to expect. He turned to see the three of them, Brad, Kyle, and Mason, emerging from the water. Their faces were still covered in disbelief, but the anger was palpable now. They were humiliated, and humiliation made people desperate. Brad was the first to step forward, his movements aggressive, his fists clenched. "You think you can just mess with us, walk away, and call it done? You're gonna regret that," he spat, his words sharp as daggers. Jay didn't flinch. He stood tall, his posture still calm, but his muscles were ready for whatever came next. He didn't need to waste his energy with words anymore. The fight had been won through action, not threats. But then, something shifted in the air. The tension grew heavier. Jay could feel it. Brad's voice had changed, no longer sounding like an entitled bully, but like someone desperate to regain control. The crowd, which had been watching from the edges of the pool, started to gather around, sensing the shift in the energy. There were whispers now, murmurs spreading through the crowd about what had just gone down. They knew something was about to break. Mason was the next to speak, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not gonna get away with this. We've got connections." "Our parents," he started, but Brad quickly interrupted him. "No. We handle this ourselves," Brad snapped, a dark determination taking over his expression. "You pushed us too far, Carter. You think you've won, but this isn't over." Jay's gaze never wavered. He could see the change in them. What started as a petty act of bullying was now escalating into something far more serious. They weren't just angry anymore. They were scared, scrambling for anything that could reassert their power. The way they stood now, shoulders squared, eyes burning with resentment, told Jay that they weren't going to let this go. Jay knew they had something planned. He could see the fear creeping in behind their bluster. But he also knew they had underestimated him, and that mistake was about to cost them even more. These weren't just bullies now. They were cornered, and a cornered animal is always more dangerous. "What's it gonna be, Brad?" Jay asked, his voice steady, but there was a cool edge to it now. "Are you gonna keep this up, or are you gonna walk away?" Brad's face twisted with anger. For a second, Jay thought Brad might charge him again, but then something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Jay stood there, unshaken, still in control. Brad glanced at Kyle and Mason, who were both catching their breath and still recovering from the earlier chaos. Jay could feel the seconds ticking by, the tension hanging in the air like a ticking time bomb. The crowd had gone silent now, watching, waiting. Jay was ready to end it right here, but he knew he had to be smart. They were pushing him to react, to lose control. But that wasn't his way. Brad took a step back, and for a moment, Jay thought the fight might be over. But Brad's next words were enough to prove otherwise.
"This isn't over," Brad muttered, his voice laced with venom.
"You're gonna pay for this, Carter. You're gonna regret messing with us." Jay didn't say another word. He just turned away, walking slowly towards the locker room, letting the crowd part as he moved. The words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Jay had already shown them that he wasn't someone to mess with, and no matter what happened next, the power had shifted. It wasn't theirs anymore. Jay made his way toward the locker room, his heart still pounding, but his mind was clear. He knew they hadn't given up. Brad's words hung in the air, a reminder that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, Jay had made his point. He'd stood his ground, used his skills, and shown them that he wasn't someone to mess with. The locker room door swung open as he walked in, the cool air hitting him like a wave of relief. He felt the tension start to leave his muscles, the adrenaline slowly fading. But something in the pit of his stomach told him it wasn't really over. Not yet. Not with kids like Brad and his friends. As Jay stepped into the showers to wash off the remnants of the fight, he replayed the whole situation in his mind. The taunts, the push, the struggle underwater. But what really stuck with him was the look on their faces. Brad, Mason, Kyle, all of them had underestimated him. They thought they could just pick on the quiet kid and walk away. They hadn't expected him to fight back. They hadn't expected someone like him to stand tall in the face of their hate. He ran his hand through his wet hair, the sound of the water rushing down mixing with the echo of the voices outside. He knew it wasn't just about what happened at the pool. This was bigger than that. This was about standing up for himself, standing up for what was right. It wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. But Jay also knew something that none of them seemed to get. Words could only go so far. The real battle wasn't fought in the pool or the locker room. It was out there, in the halls and the classrooms, and in the way people treated each other. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As he dried off and pulled his clothes back on, he heard the locker room door open again. He looked up, half expecting to see Brad storming in, looking for another round. But instead, it was Mr. Curtis, the old lifeguard, walking toward him with a calm, steady stride.
"Nice work out there, son," Mr. Curtis said, his voice low but full of approval.
Jay didn't respond immediately. He just shrugged, wiping the last of the water from his face. "I did what I had to do." Mr. Curtis nodded, crossing his arms. "I saw. And I know it wasn't easy, but you showed them something they needed to see. They'll think twice before messing with you again. But you and I both know it's not over." "Not yet." Jay looked up, meeting Mr. Curtis's eyes. The old man's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't wrong. The world wasn't going to change overnight. But for the first time in a long time, Jay felt like maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to make a difference. Not just for himself, but for others too. Jay took a deep breath, stepping past Mr. Curtis and out into the hallway. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't going to pretend like everything was going to be fine from here on out. But he had learned something today. Something powerful. Strength wasn't just about what you could do with your fists. It was about knowing when to fight, when to stand firm, and when to walk away. As he walked through the empty halls, he heard the faint sound of laughter and voices drifting from the classrooms, but they didn't bother him. For once, he felt like he was walking with a purpose. He wasn't just the quiet kid anymore. He wasn't the easy target. And the next time Brad or anyone else tried to mess with him, he'd be ready. Because this wasn't just about surviving the moment. It was about making sure the next generation didn't have to fight the same battles. Jay was done letting people walk all over him. And he wasn't going to back down. The next few days felt like a strange mixture of calm and tension. Jay kept his head down at school, trying to avoid Brad and his friends as much as possible. But even though they hadn't made another move, Jay could feel the undercurrent of something brewing. The looks in the hallways were different now, whispers behind his back, glares when they thought he wasn't looking. It wasn't over, and deep down,
Jay knew it.
It wasn't just the kids who were the problem. The real challenge, Jay realized, was the system. At Kingswood, it wasn't just about surviving the bullies. It was about surviving the school itself. Brad's father, the police chief, had already started pushing the narrative that Jay had attacked his son without provocation. The story started to spread like wildfire. Even though Jay had acted in self-defense, the people with the power to change the story, Brad's family, Kyle's mom on the school board, Mason's parents, were all involved. And when you had money and influence on your side, things didn't always go the way they should. Jay's mom, Denise, had tried to stay positive. She worked long hours as a nurse, often coming home late, but she always made sure Jay knew she was proud of him. "Just keep your head up, baby," she would say. "Stay focused on your future." But Jay knew the system wasn't going to let him off that easily. The school was already making moves to distance itself from the incident, sending vague emails to the parents, saying they were looking into the matter. But Jay could see the writing on the wall. They were more concerned about keeping things quiet than doing what was right. The worst part? It wasn't just Brad and his crew anymore. It was everyone else who stayed silent when they saw what was happening. The teachers who didn't step in, the students who looked the other way. Jay felt the weight of that silence, and it weighed on him more than anything the bullies had done. They weren't just fighting him, they were fighting the truth. One afternoon, Jay's fears were realized. As he walked through the parking lot, he saw a group of teachers huddled together by the front steps, whispering. As he got closer, he heard his name. They weren't talking about the fight. No, they were discussing the incident with Brad and how to handle it. It didn't take a genius to figure out that they were leaning towards siding with Brad's version of events. Jay felt the anger rise up in his chest, but he shoved it down. He couldn't let them see him lose control. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. He walked past them, pretending not to notice. But as he entered the school, something inside of him hardened. He had to do something. If they weren't going to listen, if they weren't going to make this right, then he'd have to find a way to show them the truth. That night, as he sat in his room, Jay opened his phone and started scrolling through the social media posts. It was like a firestorm. People were already taking sides. Some of them called him a hero, defending himself against the bullies. Others, though, said he was the aggressor, making it look like Brad had done nothing wrong. The lies spread faster than the truth, but Jay knew he couldn't let that happen. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't let others define who you are, son. You define it yourself." The next day, Jay made a decision. It wasn't enough to survive this battle. He needed to stand up and fight for the truth, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. The system had already failed him once. Now, it was his turn to make sure they couldn't bury what happened. He didn't know what would come of it, or how far this fight would go. But one thing was clear. Jay wasn't going down without a fight. Not now. Not ever. As the days went by, Jay continued to navigate the tension at Kingswood Academy. It wasn't easy. The whispers didn't stop. The glares didn't fade. The weight of the situation seemed to press down on him more and more each day. But through it all, Jay learned something important. Something that went deeper than any fight, any insult, or any moment of humiliation. It wasn't about winning the battle. It was about what you did when everything seemed stacked against you. Jay had fought back, yes. He had stood his ground when pushed, defended himself when no one else would. But what he was realizing now was that strength wasn't just about what you could do in the heat of the moment. Real strength came from your ability to rise above it all, to keep your integrity intact, and to fight for what's right, even when the world was trying to tear you down. One night, as he sat with his mom at the kitchen table, a warm plate of her homemade jambalaya in front of him, Jay reflected on everything that had happened. Denise looked at him, her tired eyes soft with concern, but there was a quiet pride there too. She knew the fight wasn't over. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she also knew Jay had something inside him that couldn't be broken. "You've got your grandfather's strength in you," she said quietly, handing him a glass of iced tea. "And I've seen you hold it together, Jay. I'm proud of you no matter what happens." Jay smiled at her, but there was something different in the air now. The weight was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy. He knew that no matter how things turned out, he wasn't alone. And he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something bigger than that. For the people who didn't have a voice, for the kids who were still afraid to stand up, for everyone who'd ever been pushed down and made to feel like they didn't belong. That was when he realized the true power of what he'd done. Standing up for yourself was important, but it wasn't enough. It was about making sure the world knew that you weren't afraid to speak up, to show others that they didn't have to live in fear either. And that wasn't just about physical strength. It was about inner strength, too. It was about using your voice, your actions, and your dignity to break through the lies and the hate. Over the next few weeks, Jay continued to deal with the fallout. The bullies never let up completely, and the rumors didn't stop overnight. But the more Jay stood firm, the more he realized that the narrative was starting to change. The people who had once turned a blind eye began to speak up. Other students who had been too afraid to say anything now came forward, showing their support. Teachers who had stayed quiet began to listen. In the end, Jay didn't just win the fight at the pool. He won something much bigger. He made people rethink the way they saw him, and maybe, just maybe, the way they saw others like him. The system might not have been perfect, but it was starting to shift, and Jay knew he had played a part in that. As he walked through the halls of Kingswood one last time, he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just the quiet kid anymore. He wasn't just the target of the bullies. He was someone who had faced his fears, stood up for what was right, and made a difference. And that was the lesson he wanted everyone to walk away with. The real fight isn't about proving your worth to others. It's about proving your worth to yourself. Because when you stand up for yourself, you also stand up for those who can't fight back. And in the end, that's what makes you strong. As the weeks passed, Jay felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known before. The storm he'd weathered wasn't over. There were still whispers behind his back, still eyes that judged him, but it didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was that he had found his voice. And for the first time, he realized that finding it wasn't just about standing up to Brad or anyone else. It was about what came next. Jay had been accepted into a scholarship program for underprivileged students, one that offered mentorship and opportunities for those who had the potential to go beyond their circumstances. His grandfather would have been proud. It was a step forward, a way out of the cycle that so many kids from neighborhoods like his got stuck in. Jay had always dreamed of something more, something bigger than just getting by, and this scholarship was a key to that door. But Jay didn't just want to use the scholarship for himself. He wanted to give back. He wanted to make sure the next kid who came to Kingswood, or any school, didn't have to feel like he did, that they didn't have to fight their way through a world that didn't understand them. He knew now that he had a responsibility. He had a platform, no matter how small, and he wasn't going to let it go to waste. He started speaking out more, not just for himself, but for others too. During class discussions, when the topic of race or inequality came up, Jay didn't stay silent anymore. He shared his experiences, his struggles, and the lessons he'd learned the hard way. Some of his classmates were uncomfortable. They didn't want to hear it, but others listened, and that made it worth it. Jay also found himself working with a local youth organization, mentoring kids who faced the same challenges he had growing up. It wasn't always easy. Some kids didn't want to listen. They were angry, like he had been, angry at a world that didn't seem to care about them. But Jay wasn't there to judge. He was there to show them that their lives could be different, that they didn't have to accept the hand they were dealt. And slowly, one conversation at a time, he was changing minds. But it wasn't just the kids he mentored who were learning from him. Jay had started to see things differently, too. He started to understand that real power didn't come from fists or physical strength. It came from understanding your worth, your purpose. It came from seeing the world clearly and knowing you had the power to change it, no matter how small the change seemed. Jay had become more than just a survivor. He had become a leader. And while the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, Jay knew he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't done with Kingswood, with Atlanta, with the world. He had just begun. His story wasn't just about one fight in a pool. It was about the battles we all face, the ones that aren't always visible to others. The real fight, he realized, was about breaking free from the expectations people had for you, about defining your own path and helping others do the same. As Jay looked ahead, he saw more challenges, but he also saw the possibility of change. Not just for himself, but for everyone who felt like they didn't belong, like they had to fight for their place in the world. Jay knew now that his place wasn't just in the pool, or in the classroom, or even on the streets of his neighborhood. His place was everywhere, fighting for what was right, standing up for what he believed in, and helping others rise along the way.